Hello, everyone, and welcome as we finish this class that we've titled Life Habits. And we've looked at the life habits of the first century church, and we've looked at these six major components community and solitude, feasting and fasting, praying and acting. These six major components we find in the first century church and in the life of Jesus. And as we've marched through those and looked at those, we have seen how they've been implemented or how they've been changed even in our lifetime. And we are trying to get back to what the first century church was doing and how they did these aspects or these qualities, if you will. But one thing that sticks out to us, one thing that we've talked about through this entire time is the season, okay? If you look at these qualities, some of them are contradictory. You can't have solitude and community at the same time. You can't be feasting and fasting. You can't be praying and acting. These things, a lot of them butt heads. We did also talk about, just briefly, that they can go together. And so I want to touch on that point a little bit more. Some of these qualities that we have looked at, and we see that Jesus does them at the exact same time. I want you to think about when he goes off into the wilderness to be alone. One, he's implementing solitude, and he's focusing, and he's being ready. And then he takes on feast or fasting, so he's humbling himself there before God. And then when we see him out there, we know that he's praying. It tells us that he spends his time fasting in prayer. And so we see that these things all went together in Jesus' time when he was tempted by the devil. And these are great things, but we also see that Jesus would be having community and having feasts together at the same time, and at the same time teaching and talking to people and helping them. And so he was acting, he was doing things. And so doing one of these things does not exclude you from doing multiple of these things, but doing one of these things does kind of exclude you from doing the other with the set. This is interesting and something that I'm looking forward to discussing and talking about, a time for every season. And this always drives me back to Ecclesiastes. If you have your Bibles, I'm just going to be reading from Ecclesiastes chapter 3. For everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to break down and a time to build up. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to cast away stones, and at a time to gather stones together. A time to embrace, and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to seek, and a time to lose. A time to keep, and a time to cast away. A time to tear, and a time to sow. A time to keep silence, and a time to speak. A time to love, and a time to hate. A time for war, and a time for peace. See, as we read through this, we understand that our life goes through different seasons. We can look outside and we can look at the weather, and whether it's summer, fall, winter, or spring, we know that each one of these it holds a unique purpose. Farmers, they harvest during the fall, but it's because they planted in the springtime. And we see that they planted in the end of winter, and it comes up during the spring and grows to fruition, and then you harvest in the fall. And so we know that each one of these, you don't plant whenever it's time to be harvesting, and you don't harvest whenever it's time to be planting. There's always this idea, this concept of a time to do a certain thing. And so with that in mind, as we look at our six qualities, we see that there's a time for community, but also there's a time for solitude. And how do we figure those out? And how do we determine which one is the right time for us at the right particular time? And the same thing with prayer and acting, or feasting and fasting. How do we determine the time for each of these events? And that's going to be our first question that we tackle in our Zoom class, which will meet at 7 o'clock on Sunday night for the junior high and 7:30 for the senior high. As we tackle this concept of when is the right time for each of these qualities. Another question that I want to ask is an interesting one to me, and I want to hear what you have to say is, of the qualities, prayer, acting, feasting, fasting, community, and solitude. That was 7. I left off this thumb. Community and solitude. Which one of these is most important to you? Which one do you find to be something that is a key for your Christianity? And so I'm excited to talk about that as we dive in. Again, that's Sunday night at 7 o'clock for the junior high and 7:30 for the senior high. I'll see you then.